Hello, friends. Now, as in my channel, you are currently viewing a lot of videos on Java programming and their concept. And here, one more thing what I have added is that I'm adding few questions which you often see in the Viva programming, in Viva as well as in Java programming related to the job seekers basically in interviews, that is basic questions related to the Java programming, and we have already covered few part of it. Now we are moving further and we are going to add few more questions which you often see in your or you often face actually in the Viva during your Viva, or maybe you may be asked these type of questions in interview also. So the next thing what I'm going to cover here is basically some technical things like constructor. There's a common question with the constructors. Now what are constructors and what are the use of these constructors, how many types of constructors are there and all. So basically if you see the constructors, these are actually method itself, but these methods have some special properties, and these properties are basically, as their name should always be the same as that of a class name. Obviously, let's say we have a class with the particular name, let's say for example ABC. So if we are going to make constructor in a program, that constructor's name will also be the same with the class name exactly. Like let's say the class name is ABC, where A is capital, A, B and C. So while naming a constructor, you have to name it as ABC, where A should be capital. Let's say you are naming it ABC but it is all small, it won't be called as a constructor, because Java is a strictly case sensitive language, as I've already been mentioned to you and you must be knowing. So make sure that you are exactly matching the cases also. This is one thing, but this is not the only thing. Other than the name, a constructor also has got some special features, like it does not return any value. Remember, the constructor, it does not return any value at all. And I think you must be knowing, if a method is not returning any value, you use a keyword called void in front of the method name, but not in the case of a constructor. This is a point to be noted. While making or defining a constructor, although it does not return any value, not at all, but we will still not use the keyword called void. You just simply have to name it as ABC in that case, without mentioning any its return type, because it does not return any value. So you must be thinking, oh, I should write void in front of it, but no. So this is another thing. So basically what we have seen is the constructor is a special kind of method whose name is same as that of a class name, exactly the same. Even the cases also need to be taken care of, and its return type, because it does not return any value. So you may be thinking of, I should write void. So make sure that I'm repeating again that you need not to mention any return type for it. Now there's one more thing, like we know we can overload a method. That means we can have more than one method in my program, but there will be slight difference that we'll discuss later. But you maybe think of, if we can overload a constructor, then we should be able to overload a constructor also. Yes, if we overload a method, we can overload a constructor also. It means I can have more than one constructor in my program. Let's say, taking the same example, let's say the method name is ABC, or sorry, the class name. So I can have method name also as ABC, but that method will be called as a constructor. But at the same time, I can overload this constructor also. So I can have more than one constructor with the name ABC. Obviously, there is no choice of any other name. So will these overloaded constructor exist simultaneously? Yes, it is. But if they are existing simultaneously, there must be some difference. As we already know in case of method overloading, if I have more than one method with the same name, there must be some difference. That implies for constructor also. So in case of a constructor overloading, I can have more than one constructor in my program, but there must be some differences, so that as and when I'm invoking that constructor, the particular one will be called. They can't exactly be the same. So if we talk about calling of a constructor, so a calling of a constructor is only in that case when we create an object of a class. Unlike calling a method, remember, to call a method, what we do is we create an object of that class, and with the help of that object, using dot operator, we call that method of that particular class. But this is not the case of a constructor. We cannot call a constructor using dot operator. Constructor will be called or invoked, I should say, only when we create an object. If we closely look at that particular statement to create an object, what we do is we write class name, object name, equal sign, and then new. Then at the end, what we write? Constructor. That is same as that of class name, with bracket open and close, semicolon. So that last part is a constructor, and actually it's a call of that constructor. It can be any constructor. If I have more than one constructor in my program, obviously. So this is the only way to call a constructor. It will not be called with the with an object of that particular class. This is a point to be remembered. Constructor will be called when we create an object of that particular class. But like a method, we need to define a constructor also. But if we look at the type of those constructors, basically we have three types of constructors. Those are default constructors, parameterized constructors, and copy constructors. First we talk about default constructor. Default constructor is a constructor which do not as such do any specific thing, and it has no parameter also in its parenthesis body. And this constructor, normally if we do not create, it will be supplied by the program itself. That means default constructor is not necessarily we need to create it, because you must have seen while doing some small programs, we hardly make any constructor, but actually when we create an object of that particular class, there is a call for that constructor. So surprisingly, how can we call a constructor while creating an object which has not been defined? But this is True. We can call a constructor without creating it, but this will be only of default type, because as I said, default constructor is provided by the program itself if we have not defined it. So this is the case of a default constructor. Now coming to the parameterized one, that means a constructor with parameters with some arguments. So this constructor obviously we need to define, and then this constructor will have parameters in its last part, that is within those parentheses, and we will pass some value in it, and that will be passing on to the variables. That means it will initialize those variables during its call. So those constructors which has got parameter in its parameter list within those parentheses are called parameterized constructors, and these constructors, these type of constructor, we need to define it. It will not be supplied or provided by the program itself. And the third, which is quite important conceptually, is copy constructor. Now as its name suggests, it's a copy constructor. That means it is going to copy something. Now what it is going to copy? First we'll see where it can be used. Let's say we have created an object using let's say a simple constructor called parameterized constructor. Fine. Now if I want to create another object, but at the same time I want to pass exactly the same value what the previous object is holding. I think you must be getting my point. I'm repeating. Let's say if I have created an object using a parameterized constructor, so that means that object has been initialized with some values which that parameterized constructor has provided. Now I want to create another object of that same class, but I want that another object should also hold the same value what the previous object is holding. So in that case I can use a copy constructor. So this copy constructor, what it will do, it will simply copy the value of the previous object to the newly created object. That means it will simply copy its value of that previous object to the newly created object. So this is simple definition of a copy constructor. But please remember, in copy constructor, in its parameter list we will pass the previously created object as an argument. So copy constructor accept an object as a parameter, and this is that object which has already been created. So when we will call this copy constructor, so what it will do, it will copy the value of that object which has been passed in its parameter list to the newly created object. So now what will happen, the both the object will be holding the same value. I think you must be getting my point. So basically we have seen three types of constructor: default constructor, parameterized constructor, and copy constructor. Now with this, there's another point to be noted, is that sometimes I'm talking about arguments, sometimes I'm saying parameters. So you must be wondering what actually is this. So you know that what we do, first we declare an object, a method, then we define that method, and finally we call it. So what we do normally, what we declare a method, then we define it, then finally we call it. So this is the steps: declaration, definition, and then calling. But when actually we are running a program, first the control goes to the calling part of that method, and then after going to the calling part, it try to locate that what actually this, if it is a method, what need to be done with this. So it goes to its definition part, and in definition part it executes its body, and whatever you are doing inside the body will be executed. So please remember, while defining and declaring it, we pass some parameters in its parameter list if needed. So those parameters which I am passing in any particular method's parameter list are actually parameters. And while calling that particular method, the parameter which I am passing in that body of in that parenthesis list of that method are actually called arguments. I am repeating, the parameters in the parameter list of a particular method, while defining that method, the parameters which I am passing are actually the parameters. While calling that particular method, what I am passing in that parameter list are actually called arguments. So these are two different terms. Sometimes we use them vice versa, but technically there's a slight difference between parameters and arguments. Arguments are those parameters which we pass during its call, and parameters are actually those parameters which we pass during its definition. And if you technically see, these arguments are actually actual parameters, and these parameters which we pass during definition part are actually called formal parameters. So another two terms are coming, formal and actual parameters. So the formal parameters are actually those parameters which we pass during its definition, whereas actual parameters are those parameters which we pass during its call. Now you can make an idea is that formal parameters are actually parameters, whereas actual parameters are actually arguments. I think this point I'm able to clarify you. I'm repeating again, the actual parameters are actually arguments which we normally use during calling of a method, and formal parameters are actually parameters which we pass during its definition. So I hope that I must be able to clarify this concept. So we have clarified few facts here, like formal parameters, actual parameters, then arguments and parameters, then what are constructors and the types of constructor and their uses. So I'm concluding this video right here only, and in my next videos also I'll be covering more and more questions related to your Viva or your interview questions, and keep following my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.